State of Fear, where terror is homegrown. Join us as we take a drive down dusty back roads and discover the obscure and dark history of this country, human and otherwise, that lurk in your backyard.
Hey guys, welcome on back to State of Fear podcast. I am Chris, and as always with me is my good friend, my good buddy, my co-host, James.
What's up, everybody?
Hey guys, today is Delaware, the great state of Delaware. The state that, if anybody from my time remembers, is the state that Wayne and Garth could not figure out what the fuck happens in Delaware. So if anybody remembers that skit, they were doing like California and Texas, and they had, things for that. But then when they got to Delaware, they were just like,
I got nothing.
we're in Delaware.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's, but Delaware has more going on than people think.
Yes, they do.
So today's topic is on Delaware's first and only serial killer, Brian Pennell, a.k.a. the Corridor Killer.
Damn. And like I said, that is a small state anyway.
Yes.
I think it's second smallest next to Rhode Island.
Yeah, that's correct.
So, yeah, it's not much to it.
So, but before we get started on that, of course, we're going to have weird news of the day. Also, don't forget to stick around at the end. We're going to have a personal audio experience from one of our listeners, so be sure to tune in for that.
Absolutely.
But right now, James, do you have any knowledge or any interest in serial killers at all?
Not really, Chris.
No? Are you not a true crime fan?
Well, I really didn't follow it much. It never really intrigued me. You've heard the main stories like the Gacy's and the Dahmers and those guys. They all made the news.
Right.
He's like, oh, well, big deal. It's commercialized, blah, blah, blah. But I don't want to make light of it either. But like I said, it was not something I followed. But as we have started studying these things, looking into these strange stories and things like that and weirdness in other states, I have started to, my interest is starting to peak on things of this nature because, when you start digging, you start finding out a lot of really nasty stuff about this country.
And this is real life horror. So have you, I mean, we're only, like, how many episodes in at this point, like 8 or 9 or something like that. Have you found this to be scarier than the other stuff that we cover, or is the other stuff still scarier to you in your mind?
The serial killer stuff?
Yeah. The mass murder.
More like killer. It makes me mad. People who just go around and indiscriminately killing lots of people just because they can get away with it for a certain amount of time before they eventually screw up. It just makes me mad that people out there, I mean, I know there's people out there like that. I get it.
Oh, yeah.
But it's just always infuriated me that they go out there and indiscriminately just kill people, turn people's lives upside down, and then when they get caught, they laugh, no remorse. And unfortunately, half of them aren't put to death in manners which I feel are necessary. Because I remember when we talked about Ronald Gene Simmons, back from Arkansas. I have no sympathy whatsoever for these people when they're caught, and I wish they would. Unfortunately, yes, I'm going to say it, die in a painful or like manner to their victims. But
now I will say that yes, for the vast majority of them, they are psychopaths, sociopaths. Have no remorse or no qualms about killing. There's been a few exceptions. There was I don't remember the guy's name, but there was a serial killer that was actually known as the Weepy Voice Killer, who would kill someone and then call 911 crying and begged them to stop him because he could not stop himself. And there are audio calls out there, 911 calls of him calling and crying. He was very remorseful what he did, but he couldn't stop himself.
Now, I always wonder if people like this are possessed somehow, or they're just off their rocker, or...
It's I think it's just a whole misfiring and miswiring of chemical and just electrical things going on in their head. And they have a compulsion they just can't stop. even when they want to, they just can't do it.
Well, it's like I said, because, when I talk about myself, it's weird because just a little fact about myself,
mm-hmm.
I wouldn't hurt a fly unless I didn't have to.
Right.
But then when I think about it, like I say, if somebody hurt my family or something like that, and when I think about what I would do and how nuts I would get and the things I would do to them to pay them back, it's quite savage, actually. So the capacity inside one's mind to just flip a lid and just go berserk is, it's always there. The potential's there for anybody to probably do that. I know it sounds crazy, but it's just
a different way of thinking.
Yeah. And, and some of these people, I guess, just can't distinguish.
Well, for them, like for you, that your motivation is that exactly is taking care of your family, is having revenge on people who hurt your family. But like for, mass murderers, serial killers, it's their motivation to them their motivation is just as justified as yours is to you.
Yeah.
Because of how they're wired or how their mind thinks.
Well, you got like sick bastards like Gacy, who would kill after doing foul deeds and acts and things like that. He just had no, he was just a filthy, dirty, low-down human being.
Right.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
And some people, I guess, just don't have.
They've got that weird wiring thing.
I guess so. Yep.
So I take it then you don't really have a favorite serial killer that you've learned of in the past or you've read on in the past?
No. Like I said, the only, I guess you wouldn't even call him a serial killer, it's more of a spree killer, like you said, is a guy I discussed in a previous episode, Alfred Packer. I guess he's the only, when I was growing up, he was the only one I really knew of. And then I heard about some other people. I've heard of Jonestown, but that was more of a mass suicide. But when you brainwash people and you lead them to death and stuff like that, I guess I would call it murder.
Oh, that's definitely murder on a massive scale. For sure. Yeah.
But, was it the Manson types, stuff like that, but, but I never really, I guess you could say, I never did study it or look into it. I just didn't find any interest in it, I guess. It's hard to explain why. It's more like I don't want to know about the evils that some people do.
Gotcha.
I guess, not hiding my head in the sand. It's just something I'm not going to go look for because it bothers me so much.
Okay.
So why am I going to intentionally piss myself off reading about something that I can't control or do anything about? You know what I mean?
Well,
it's just weird.
I get that. And I think that's the vast majority of people are like that. But then there are another majority of people like myself who are just fascinated with this stuff. And I think we're fascinated by the idea that people have this mentality that they can go and do these things. But then also the idea that, serial killers, anybody's seen the show Mindhunters, the FBI started a whole unit around these guys because they didn't think like normal killers. Normal killers have, or I guess you want to call them normal, but prior to this, other killers had like certain motivations, act of passion or revenge, but these individuals didn't have those patterns and didn't fit those motives, and so they had to create a whole new school of thought for these people in order to catch them. And I think that's what fascinates most of us is that these people all have, like, you've got your Ted Bundy, who was, a charming individual who was able to con multiple women into, helping him and then kill them. And then you've got people like Dahmer, who was not charming, who was kind of socially awkward, but he was able to, lure enough young boys into his house to kill and eat them. Then you got people like, John Wayne Gacy, who used his position as a construction foreman to hire young boys and then to get them in his house with promises of like booze and party and stuff. And then, and so more or less every serial killer has their own distinct personality and different style. And I think that's what fascinates many of us is that they're very unique.
Yeah.
And so, but a lot of them have a lot of commonalities as far as like early childhood or how they were raised or triggers that caused them to become the way they are. But then when they find their, I guess you would call it their niche, like even BTK had his own different niche. He didn't have a particular type of victim. It ranged from young to old,
just indiscriminate. Yeah.
And he he was, of the mindset enough to stop for a good period after after I guess he got married or whatever, and then, he only got caught. He wouldn't have gotten caught if he hadn't been so damn arrogant and sent the FBI a letter 20 years after his last kill,
daring him to do something.
Yeah, after his last kill, he sent them a damn letter on a floppy disk, and then they traced it back to the computer he used at the church where he was a deacon.
Stupid.
And he got caught. Otherwise, he wouldn't have got caught. And as far as I know there are other serial killers out there that haven't been caught yet. Zodiac's never been caught.
Nope.
And he used a gun. A whole different thing. It's not as personal as people who use knives or whatever. But he was a scary individual as well. We'll have to get to him at some point on the next California one, because he's a very, very scary individual. But I don't think I have a particular one that I like more than others, but I think I would have to say Zodiac probably fascinates me the most. Him or the Cleveland torso butcher is also fascinating, because he was his kills were very disturbing, but also because his time period and when he was killing coincided with one of the legends of U.S. government history, Elliot Ness.
Okay. Because
that was Elliot Ness's last case, and it was never solved.
Solved.
Yeah, and it drove Elliot Ness mad. So the fact that it was integrated with that and the Untouchables also, to me, is very interesting.
Cool.
So I like the torso killer, the Zodiac, and then probably, I guess that's probably the only two that I like to hear about all of them. I like to listen about all of them. I like to read about all of them because they're fascinating. But if I had two that I could pick, that would be the ones that were the most fascinating to me, would be the Zodiac and the Cleveland torso butcher.
Okay.
So
sweet.
But that brings up a good point, because we recently did a spree killer.
Yes.
In Ronald Gene Simmons.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we briefly touched upon it in the episode, but now we're doing a serial killer, and for those of you who do not know, the difference between the two is quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So, spree killers, they are people who commit multiple murders at different locations with no cooling off period. And it's generally done in a short amount of time. Generally, it's no more than 7 days in between killings, or between start and finish, I should say. So like Ronald Gene Simmons, he did his over like a 2-3 day period.
I think, it was like 2 days.
Yeah, because he spent some time in the house with the bodies, and then he went off to that law firm and killed people there. Whereas, so then there's like mass murders, like school shootings. Those are things that take place in one location and all in one go.
Yep.
Like school shootings.
Yeah. Like
the Las Vegas shooting, things like that, where it's in one location and it happens at one time, and that's it. And then for spree killers, generally the killer knows the victims that they're killing.
Yeah.
Now, not always, of course, but like mass murders, such as the biggest one of all, the Nazis or Pol Pot, or even the school shootings. Generally, they know some of them, but not all of them.
A lot of workplace massacres and things like that too. Yeah. Post offices and stuff like that. I mean, I don't mean to touch on that and be insensitive. I'm not saying that at all. But the term "going postal" came from things of that nature. There were several post office shootings at one point.
Oh yeah, and now it's a phrase now.
They'd go in there and shoot people up, indiscriminately. So.
And the cooling off period is the important part of separating the two, because it speaks to very different motivations of spree killers versus serial killers. Because spree killers generally, if they know the people, or if something sets them off. One of the rare exceptions to this rule that I can think of again is Charles Whitman. He had some sort of a brain injury, but the people that he killed from atop the tower, he didn't really know. He just randomly picked people.
He just started popping people.
Yeah. Which is kind of like the individual from the Las Vegas shooting.
Yep.
He just picked people out in the crowd at that concert and started picking people off.
Yep.
Serial killers, their motivation, as we mentioned, is different per individual. And their cooling off period is different per individual, and so that is what makes them different from a spree killer. They, like for instance, the one we're going to go over today, Brian Pennell, I believe he only had 5 victims, 3 of which he was officially charged for at first, But then, spree killers will have way more victims. Mass murders have way more victims.
Yeah.
Certain serial killers are called heavy hitters, and those are the people like the John Wayne Gacy's, the Dahmers that have
30 or 40 dead.
Right. Yeah. Whereas he's not a heavy hitter, but he's still a serial killer because of the definition of how he committed his crimes, when he committed his crimes.
Yeah.
The fact that he had different motivations from spree killers and such.
Absolutely. So, yeah. Like I said, they have an MO.
Right.
It's like they're almost trying to challenge law enforcement to catch them. And apparently they find some kind of thrill in this, and it's disgusting.
Yeah.
But it's almost like a challenge to them, and they get off on it, and it's just bad news.
All right, but before we get to that, let's go ahead and start with the weird news of the day. What have you got for us today, James?
Oh, man. This is an interesting one I found. It is called Mystery Surrounding Dinosaur Footprints on a Cave Ceiling in Central Queensland Solved.
Ceiling, huh? All right, let's hear it.
Yeah. The mystery surrounding dinosaur footprints on a cave ceiling in central Queensland has been solved in an article published in Historical Biology after more than half a century. University of Queensland paleontologist Dr. Anthony Romilio discovered pieces to a decades-old puzzle in an unusual place, a cupboard under the stairs of a suburban Sydney home. The town of Mount Morgan near Rockhampton has hundreds of fossil footprints and has the highest dinosaur track diversity for the entire eastern half of Australia, wow. Dr. Romilio said. Earlier examinations of the ceiling footprints suggested some very curious dinosaur behavior, that a carnivorous theropod walked on all four legs.
Ooh, interesting.
As quoted, "You do not assume T-Rex used its arms to walk. How could he?"
Yeah.
And we didn't expect anyone of its earlier predatory relatives of 200 million years ago did either. Researchers wanted to determine if this dinosaur did move using its feet and arms, but found accessing research material was difficult. To quote, "For a decade, the Mount Morgan track site has been closed, and the published 1950s photographs don't show all the 5 tracks," Dr. Romilio said. However, Dr. Romilio had a chance meeting with local dentist Dr. Rosalind Dick, whose father found many dinosaur fossils over the years. To quote, "I'm sure Anthony didn't believe me until I mentioned my father's name, Ross Staines," Ms. Dick said. "Our father was a geologist and reported on the Mount Morgan caves containing the dinosaur tracks in 1954. Besides his published account, he had high-resolution photographs and detailed notebooks, and my sisters and I had kept it all. We even had his dinosaur footprint plaster cast stored under my sister's Harry Potter cupboard in Sydney."
That's cool.
Yeah. Dr. Romilio said the wealth and condition of dinosaur information archived by Ms. Dick and her sisters Heather Skinner and Janice Miller was amazing. To quote, "I've digitized the analog photos and made a virtual 3D model of the dinosaur footprint and left the material back at the family's care," he said. "In combination with our current understanding of dinosaurs, it told a pretty clear-cut story. The team firstly concluded that all 5 tracks were footprint impressions, that none were dinosaur handprints.
Wow.
Also, the splayed toes and moderately long middle digit of the footprints resembled 2-legged herbivorous dinosaur tracks differing from prints made by theropods. Rather than one dinosaur walking on 4 legs, it seems though we had got 2 dinosaurs for the price of 1, both plant-eaters that walked bipedally along the shore of an ancient lake. The tracks lining the cave ceiling were not made by dinosaurs hanging upside down. Instead, the dinosaurs walked on the lake's sediment, and these imprints were covered in sand. In the Mount Morgan caves, the softer lake sediment eroded away and left the harder sandstone infills. So in other words, these were actually at a lake surface and somehow ended up
solidifying
and ending up on the roof of a cave.
That's weird.
Like it eroded out from underneath the lake bed or something like that. I guess the lake dried up or something, but that's where the story ends.
Wow, cool.
So that was interesting.
Yeah, very crazy.
Weird news, but, could there be some cave walking dinosaurs? I mean,
probably, man. I mean, if they were, most people believe that they were descended from birds, but
fossilized footprints from underneath. How cool is that?
That's really neat.
Eroded from underneath. I know it has nothing to do with our current topic of the day, but I just thought that story was kind of cool.
That's pretty neat. Yeah, that's pretty great. So, yeah, I like that story. Good story, James.
Hell yeah.
All right, so today we're going to talk about Stephen Brian Pennell. It was the first and only serial killer for Delaware.
The only one, and all the 240 plus years of the United States history, only one serial killer in the whole state of Delaware.
That's right. Now,
like I said, it is small, but that's unusual.
I'm glad they still have one though.
I'm glad. But geez, yeah.
So most of the information, actually, I should say all the information today comes from 3 different articles. One from a Delaware Today article by Jeff Murdoch. One from a WHYY.org article by Nichelle Polston. And then the rest actually comes from court documents that I was able to find regarding the killings.
Sweet.
Yeah. So Delaware is generally considered a peaceful place to live. Now, it's known for several things. It's known as the first state of the Union.
Yep.
It's known as having some of the fastest internet speeds in the U.S., which I'm kind of jealous of. It's also known for having no sales tax. So, those are all pretty good things.
Why do I not live in Delaware?
I know, right? But from 1987 to 1988, Delaware became home to something much more insidious. The state's first and only serial killer. The violent murder of Shelley Ellis on November 29, 1987, marked the beginning of the strange and terrible tale of Stephen Brian Pennell's reign as the state of Delaware's first convicted serial killer. All in all, 5 women would lose their lives to this killer. 3 more bodies followed the first victim, and all had been brutally beaten and sadistically tortured.
Now, see, you're going to take their life, but you got to go and pull all that shit, too. That just bugs the living hell out of me.
The body of the 5th woman has never been found.
Oh, Lord.
So, unlike other serial killers, there's not much known about his early life.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because once he was caught, he was incarcerated for a little bit of time before he was executed. However, from the time he was caught to the time he was executed, he refused to actually speak on any of the events.
Wow.
Yeah, he didn't want to talk about his killings. He didn't want to talk about any of it. And anytime he did bring it up, he always did it in third person as if he was not actually the one that committed these crimes.
And that is quite odd because there were a lot of these egomaniac serial killers who bragged on their exploits once they were caught because they're like, well, my life's over, so I'm going to go out, the lawman ain't going to get the best of me.
Right.
I did what I did and I'm proud of it and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to brag on it.
Now, there's not much known about his early life other than he seems to have had a normal childhood and come from a normal life, which is in contrast to other serial killers who usually come from some sort of abuse or neglect from one or both parents. Now, what is known is this. For a short time, he studied criminology for several semesters at the University of Delaware. He applied for numerous positions at the State Police Department of Delaware, though he was rejected for each one due to various reasons. Now, he ended up working as an electrician and settled in Newcastle, Delaware. During that time, he married his wife, Kathy, and they had some kids. But as soon as he married her, he began to control every aspect of her life and take a dominant presence in the household. Yes. Then, at some point, for some reason, on November 29th, 1987, while driving down Route 40, he decided to embark on his future career, if you want to call it that. And he came across victim number 1. Victim number 1 is Shirley A. Ellis. Now, Ellis was an ex-prostitute who had dreamed of becoming a nurse. She got away from the prostitute life and she distanced herself from street walking. And on November 29th, she was taking a Thanksgiving platter to an AIDS patient at Wilmington Hospital. She left around 6 to begin the 14-mile walk down Route 40 to the hospital.
Carrying dinner?
Carrying dinner.
Wow.
At about 9:25 p.m., two teenagers looking for a secluded makeout area came upon Ellis's murdered body. Police arrived at the scene. They found her partially clothed, wearing a pair of aqua blue pants. Now, she had strips of black duct tape in her hair, which they believe most likely was wrapped around her mouth to keep her from screaming. Later on, the cause of death would be determined as strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head. They found some ligature strangulation marks on her neck, numerous skull lacerations from a hammer. Her hand and feet had been bound at one point, though when the teenagers found her, her legs were spread apart. So at some point he took the tape off her legs, as well as a pattern bruising to her left breast and nipple. However, there were no other signs of sexual assault found. So there was no rape or anything like that.
He just tied her up, stripped her, and beat the living hell out of her.
Now, the authorities were stumped as to the motive for the killing because, as far as they know, she didn't have an ex-boyfriend or even an ex-husband. And according to state prosecutor Kathleen Jennings, for a time they believed it was an interstate trucker. Because Route 40 was, it's along that route. It would be 7 more months before Pennell struck again. Again, the cooling off period.
Yeah.
I mean, he was an electrician. He had a job. He had a family. But 7 months later, he finally decided he was ready to do it again. Around 11:30 p.m., Catherine DeMauro, then an active prostitute, was working along Route 40 when she was picked up for a trick. She would be found the next morning when workers at a construction site arrived to begin their shift. Now, the details of her death followed Ellis's exactly, including the lack of sexual assault, with 2 exceptions. 1, she was found fully naked. 2, numerous carpet fibers were found on her body. Blue fibers were found on her body and red on her face. Now, former Newcastle County Police Captain James Hendricks stated, quote, "We felt that the same person was responsible for both murders," end quote. So as a consequence of this second murder, the Delaware State Police and the Newcastle County Police Department formed a task force of over 100 officers and began undercover operations along Route 40. They began placing female officers undercover along Route 40 posing as prostitutes. The task force also collaborated with the FBI Behavioral Science Unit headed up by John Douglas, who is the one that wrote the book Mindhunter, which the Netflix series is based off of.
Okay.
And who is a man who interviewed all the infamous serial killers in order to start building profiles on how to figure out how to catch serial killers. He interviewed, Charles Manson. He interviewed Ed Kemper. He interviewed Son of Sam. He interviewed all of them.
Crazy.
Yeah. And he was one of the ones that helped catch Wayne Williams in Atlanta at that time as well. Though through their knowledge and experience with other serial killers, the FBI was able to make an amazing, accurate psychological profile of Delaware's serial killer. However, 2 months later...
Notice the time is shorter.
Time is shorter.
Because
he's ramping up.
Because, see, this is what I think about these guys. Once they do it once, they get that adrenaline rush. Mm-hmm. Then they go home and they calm down. They figure out they got away with it. But they enjoyed that high.
Right.
So the time period between these killings starts to shorten. I guess.
Yeah. That's probably a pretty accurate thought, yeah.
Addiction.
Right.
Exactly. It's a different kind of addiction.
2 months after Catherine DeMaro's murder, on August 22nd, a prostitute named Margaret Finner went missing from along US 13, a different route, but not too far from, again, small state. Yeah. She was witnessed getting into a blue van with no side window and rounded headlights driven by a white male. Her body would be found 3 months later near the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal.
Oh, boy.
So, not only does he ramp up to a shorter time, but he held on to the body longer.
Yeah.
Which means he took his time with it. However, because it was found 3 months later, now he may have actually dumped it sooner than that.
Yeah.
It's just that it was found 3 months later.
It was found 3 months later,
But because it was found 3 months later, it was in such a bad state of decay that the task force was unable to determine the cause of death. And her link to Pennell was insufficient, and to this day, no one has actually been charged in her death.
See, the thing is also, when I think about this, prostitutes were a lot of times targeted by these killers because they don't have any deep family ties. Nobody's checking on them. They're outcast, a lot of them, unfortunately. Nobody's looking for them if they go missing.
I was just going to make that point.
Yeah.
That's also why these serial killers who did target prostitutes were able to get away with it for so long.
Yes.
Because nobody cared about prostitutes at the time.
They were an afterthought to society. People just walked past them, ignore them.
Yeah.
They disappeared, so what?
Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yep.
Matter of fact, the Houston's very own serial killer, Dean Corll, who operated in the Heights in the 70s,
yep,
also relied on prostitutes, and that's why he got away with it for so long as well.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
He picked easy targets, and like I said, it's not somebody who people are going to be looking for.
Right. In September of 1988, the task force placed then-officer Renee Lano undercover on Route 40 to pose as a prostitute. On September 14th, she would end up coming face-to-face with the suspect. After walking up and down Route 40 all night and dealing with various individuals, including doctors, lawyers, school teachers, everybody's horny at that place. At one point, there were a line of cars waiting to talk to her.
Good Lord.
Fresh fish. So, when finally Pennell's blue van drove by. Now, according to Lano, it drove by several times before finally stopping. Lano would come face to face with the killer and years later remarked, quote, "His eyes were blank, cold, and there was no life to them. He was different than any other person who stopped for me," she recalls. "It was hard to get into a conversation. He wasn't in the moment. He was looking right through me," end quote. Remembering the van that was witnessed prior to the last victim's disappearance, Lano acted quickly. Quote, "I pretended to be interested in his van, so I had him open the door and turn on the light, and when he turned the light on, my heart stopped because it was covered in blue carpet," she recalled.
Oh, shit.
She then pretended to be even further interested in the carpet and ran her hands through it, pulling up fibers as she did.
Oh, smart.
Very smart. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Now, while Lano conversed with the suspect, Captain Hendrick, who was not too far away, ran the plates of the van and found they came back to one Stephen Pennell, an electrician with no criminal record. Now, Pennell asked Lano several times to get into the van. Each time she refused. She played it off, claiming she was either too tired from partying all night and just didn't want to do it. But at some point, Pennell seemed to have gotten suspicious, got back in his van, and drove off.
Yeah.
They had to send the fibers off to get tested. They had to test them against the ones found on Demorrow to make sure that they matched. However, 2 days after her encounter with Pennell, he struck again.
Jeez.
I'm guessing
freaking days.
Because he went out that night looking for a victim, and didn't find one.
And he didn't get his fix.
So he had to
go get one, yep.
22-year-old Michelle Gordon, a Newcastle resident and known prostitute, disappeared. Her body would be found 4 days later on September 20th on the rocky banks of the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal.
Same damn place.
Same drop-in location, yeah. Now, according to court documents, because her body had been submerged in water, no determination could be made as to the cause of death. However, injuries inflicted on her body were very similar to those found on Ellis's and Demorrow. Now, this time they had a break because there was a witness who saw Michelle Gordon get into Pennell's blue van before her disappearance.
Aha!
That would not be his last victim.
Of course not.
No, 3 days later.
Ay.
3 days. He's ramping up. He would claim his last victim. Kathleen Meyer was seen accepting a ride from a blue van by an off-duty cop. Thankfully, the cop was aware of the van's connections to the murders, wrote down the plate number, and found it came back to Pennell. Unfortunately, Pennell seemed to learn from his previous mistakes, and her body has yet to be found.
Oh, brother.
Yeah. By this time, the task force was watching Pennell's every move, and watching him so closely that at one point, Lano actually sat next to him at a Moody Blues concert.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Now, how did he not recognize her, though?
I would assume when she was dressed up as a prostitute, she was wearing a wig.
Oh, yeah.
Some heavy makeup.
Very true.
And different
Disguise,
clothing.
of course.
Exactly.
Because when you go undercover, of course, you're going to alter your appearance
now, especially
quite radically.
If you're portraying a prostitute, you have to look like a prostitute.
Yeah,
you can't look like a school teacher.
That is very true.
Or even worse, you can't look like a cop. You've got to look like a hoe.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, the task force was able to obtain a search warrant to search Pennell's van, and on September 30th, 1988, during a routine traffic stop, the cops immediately took him to the court to pay the traffic fine. Now, that's not an unheard of thing. Cops can do that. It's not done very often, but they can do that.
But there was a reason.
Exactly. They did that to keep him busy. While he was kept busy, the task force searched his van and found all the evidence they would ever need.
Oh, boy.
Blue carpet fibers, red cloth fibers matching those of the victims, bloodstains and hair in the carpet.
Oh, boy.
Duct tape.
Yep.
And what the police called a rape kit, which were pliers, whips, handcuffs, needles, knives, and restraints.
Pliers?
Which I'm assuming he used on the nipples.
Yipe.
After that, police issued an arrest warrant, and on November 29th, 1988, 1 year after Shirley Ellis's death, Pennell was arrested and charged in the deaths of Ellis, Gordon, and DeMauro.
And the other two because of lack of evidence. Nobody on one and no cause of death on the other. Exactly. So they couldn't pin it on him.
Not yet, no. The trial began on September 26, 1989 and would last over 2 months. It wouldn't be an easy trial for state prosecutor Kathleen Jennings, though, because Pennell did not seem like a typical serial killer. He was married, had a good job, no criminal record, and even had kids.
Now, does that ever matter, though?
It does, because generally, with the exception of people like Ted Bundy, who was married, and later on, BTK, who was not only married, but had kids and was a deacon in a church.
Oh, that's true.
Before that, serial killers were usually loners, outsiders, social outcasts.
Exactly.
Some of them had criminal records. Some of them had juvie records.
Yeah.
You know, because it all starts somewhere.
They had a history. Yep.
So this, he did not seem like the typical one because of these. Jennings recalled that he was a smart man, very well prepared, and had his story down. As part of its case in chief regarding the serial aspect of the murders, the state was permitted to introduce evidence of the disappearance of a woman named Margaret Finner. The jury, however, did not know Finner's name or that she was eventually found murdered. Now, Agent John Douglas, director of the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit and the author of Mindhunter, testified as an expert in the area of serial murders. After reviewing the deaths of Ellis, DeMauro, and Gordon, he opined that they were all committed by the same person. The Pennell case marked one other first. It was the first time DNA would be used in a criminal case.
This is true because back then it was in its infancy. I remember when it started to come around, but it was very, very sloppy and very, very hard to, you know, as science has advanced, of course, it's become much, much easier. But man, back then it was tough.
Even as late as the O.J. Simpson trial in the 90s, it was introduced, but the jury didn't understand it.
Yeah.
They had no idea what it meant.
That's dinonucleic acid for you folks.
Thank you, Mr. Wizard. The prosecution had experts come in to testify as to the DNA of the victims in the van. The science behind this was still new, and Jennings knew she was taking a big risk introducing it, but she felt it was very important. But it would turn out that the biggest detriment to Pennell's case was Pennell himself.
Yep.
The defense decided to have him testify. They hoped by having him testify, it would set the record straight about the blood and DNA found in the van. It didn't. Pennell claimed to have picked up DeMauro and paid her $25 for oral sex, then dropped her off and joked that she gave him $10 back. This horrified the jury and made Pennell seem cold and heartless to make a joke about a prostitute that ended up dead with DNA found in his van.
Yeah, real smart.
Right. So on Thanksgiving Day of 1989, a jury found Pennell guilty of the murders of Ellis and DeMauro. Unfortunately, the jury was hung when it came to Michelle Gordon's death.
Gordon was the one left on the bank, so they couldn't identify any marks, right?
Yeah, she was the one who they weren't able to determine cause of death.
And by, if you're acting and you're doing your job as a jury, if there is no evidence to tie it, you just can't do it.
Can't do it. So, months later, and after several appeals, new evidence in the murders of Meyer and Gordon led to indictments against Pennell. Pennell asked to represent himself in the matters, and the judge granted it. Then he did something no one expected. He pled no contest to the charges and asked the court to sentence him to death.
Damn.
Even though he pled no contest and asked for death, he did not confess to the murders and never spoke of them again, even on the eve of his execution when everyone expected him to reveal the location of Meyer's body. Never did, so her body has never been found. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection on Halloween 1991, and on March 14th, 1992, after many appeals for a stay of execution from his wife, Kathy, Pennell became the first man executed in Delaware in 46 years.
Yep. Lethal injection. And I'm sorry, it's too humane for animals like this. I'm sorry, it's just, I'm sorry, Sparky.
Old Sparky.
Sparky. Fire him up. Fry him.
He never revealed the location of Meyer's body, nor gave any interviews about his upbringing, his home life, or personal life. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit even attempted to talk to him to gain insight, but he refused. To this day, he remains one of the most enigmatic serial killers in the country.
Yeah, and it's...
Yeah. So that is the story of Stephen Brian Pennell, Delaware's first and only serial killer with a body count of 5.
5.
5.
So they assume.
So they assume.
Now, have they ever? Because according to what we've seen here, and what
he's only been charged with 4.
Only been charged with 4
because they couldn't find Myers' body.
Yeah, but see,
But because there was a witness who saw Myers getting into the van that matched. Yeah. Matter of fact, not only a witness, but it was an off-duty cop who ran the plates. So they can tie him to Myers before she went missing. However, because they couldn't find her body, and back in the 90s, in the 80s, late 80s, 90s, they probably didn't have her DNA profile on record.
Mm-hmm.
So even if they found her DNA in the van, there's nothing to match it to.
Nope.
They can't match it to. Now, and because she's a prostitute, now they probably could have matched it to something. If she had some place to live, if she had something in her house, they probably could have matched it to that. But again, as you mentioned, it was in its infancy.
And here is an interesting point, because when you just said that, prostitute and DNA evidence, if a woman's a prostitute, I'm sorry, she has several tricks in one evening. She doesn't just have sex with one person. So murdering a prostitute, if you're going to kill somebody and they're going to try to rely on DNA evidence, he could be like, it could be any one of these guys.
Right. Now,
that may sound like a simplified version, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. But at that point, I would beg to argue that she would have more than maybe 5 or 6 tricks in a night. Yeah. So you could bring in 5 or 6 people, and if you were able to match,
figure out somebody.
Yeah. If you were able to match the DNA to a person, you could bring them in and eliminate them one by one.
Yeah.
Problem is, of the 6, you might identify 4, but not the other 2.
Yeah.
So at that point, you rely upon witnesses. At this time of day, maybe cameras catching her get into a certain car. Other prostitutes who might have seen the car could get a plate or something. So that's what you're relying on at that point.
I guess so.
Yeah. Wow. So that is the story of Delaware's serial killer.
What a bastard.
Man,
I'm sorry.
It's crazy though, because
bastard.
he wasn't because we don't know anything about him, we have no idea what his mental state was. He obviously had some sort of mental issues in the fact that he tortured these women.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have sex with them, he didn't rape them, but he tortured them. But he was married, he had kids, had a job, no criminal record. Now we don't know what he was like on the job. According to his wife, he was a bit dominant.
Yeah, a little controlling and stuff like that.
We don't know anything about how he was as a father from the kids because they haven't spoken. But there's probably a good chance that he had some of the traits of serial killers as far as mental traits. But we don't know because he never spoke to anybody.
Well, and then again, they've also diagnosed many more mental disorders
since then
in the past decades.
Oh, God, yeah.
Bipolarism, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I didn't even remember hearing a term bipolar back in the 80s, if you want to know the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And he could just be flipping a switch. Multiple personality disorder. God knows what.
Yeah, we'll never know.
If he was a loving family man and then he'd go out and flip a switch and be able to take a hammer to some defenseless woman and enjoy torturing her and then throwing her in a damn river somewhere. Something's definitely something. There's a screw loose.
Yeah, he obviously had a screw loose, as most of them do. But I don't know, man.
Rough.
Yeah. So all right, James. Well, why don't you tell them where they can find us on social media and where they can find the podcast?
Absolutely. Yeah, they can find us on the fourthhand.com network, and we encourage you to go there. Our other project, What the Suck, is also on there, and there are also several other great shows.
A ton of shows.
They are fantastic shows. Great people. Go there, check it out. You can find us on social media. We are on Facebook, of course, The Big Evil. And then we are also on Instagram under State of Fear.
I do want to say real quick before you continue, if you've listened to the show to this point, you notice that at the end of each episode, we have a personal encounter that's sent in to us by a listener.
Yes.
If you have a personal encounter that you want to have on the show, send it in to us in an audio format, preferably MP3. You can make it anywhere between 3 to 10 minutes. If it has to go longer, that's fine, but the preferable time is 3 to 10 minutes, because that's a good amount of time, because normally you would just email it into us, and yes. I don't know, we just had somebody who sent us in something that was 11 minutes long and it went through, but anything longer than that, you're risking it not being able to email to us. But email it to us at stateoffearpodcast@gmail.com.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what state it is. It doesn't matter if you lived in it, in the state when you had the incident or experience, or if you just were visiting when you had the experience.
Yeah, the experiences will go on. They will go on the episode that pertains to a specific state.
Correct.
But,
you don't have to live there. As long as if you were visiting and you had it in that state, send us the experience in an audio format. Just make sure you include your name, where it was, and when it was, and then tell the story, and we'll put it on. All right, James. Well, until next time, it was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
It's great learning about this stuff.
I don't like these serial killer types, but learning about it is pretty.
They
it's
fascinate
interesting.
The shit out of me, dude. I hadn't heard of Stephen Pennell.
Yeah.
So it was fascinating to get into, to read about him,
learn about somebody you never even heard of.
Yeah.
Yep.
So until next time, we'll see you guys later.
You bet. Take care, y'all.
Oh, and don't forget to stay tuned for the personal encounter stories coming up right now.
My name is Josh Hitchins. I'm 34 years old. I was born and grew up in Sussex County, Delaware, also known as Slower Lower Delaware, which is pretty accurate. The thing you have to realize about the southern Delaware is that it is flat. There are almost no hills, so you can see the sky forever, with fields full of crops everywhere you go, and farms that have existed for well over 100 years in some cases. There is so much history in southern Delaware. If you love nature, it is an incredibly beautiful place to live. And at night, you can see all the stars, and it's so quiet. It's still very rural, so the woods are deep and never far away. I grew up in a haunted house, but that's a story for another time. The first time I saw a ghost outside of the house I lived in is the tale I'm going to tell. I spent the weekends with my grandparents a lot when I was growing up. They lived in a little town in southern Delaware, not far from the ocean. It was a simple 2-story house with a big backyard. I remember the trees being huge. My grandmother kept a garden, and I loved helping her work on it. There was a big metal barrel near the back of the yard where my grandfather burned garbage and dead leaves back when you could still do that. I used to watch the flames shoot up into the sky as he poked the burning stuff with a stick, and sometimes he would spit his chewing tobacco into the fire, which even then I thought was pretty gross. I have so many wonderful memories of my grandparents' house, but there is one memory I try not to think about because it still scares me. Behind the backyard of my grandparents' house was the old woods. Some of the trees must have been 40 or 50 feet tall. It was always so dark in there. Even in the daytime, you couldn't see much farther than the first few rows of trees. It was kind of creepy, because when you looked at it for any length of time, it felt like there was something there in the woods, waiting and watching. My grandparents had told me I was never allowed to go into the woods, not ever. They said it was dangerous in there, too easy to get lost, and there were snakes and poison ivy and big spiders and who knows what else. They didn't need to warn me. I was scared of the woods anyway. It's hard to remember, but I think I was about 8 years old when I first actually saw the thing that was watching in the woods. And at first I didn't know what I was seeing because it didn't make sense. It was a little man dressed in a black suit with a white shirt and black tie. He was standing at the very edge of the woods. He couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall. His face was very pale, but everything else about him was black. His hair, his clothes, his eyes. But the thing I remember most vividly was his mouth. His lips were stretched in a smile that seemed almost too wide for his face, and he would motion with his right arm for me to come over to him. I would stand there, frozen. He couldn't be real, but he was standing right there, and I knew he wanted me to go with him into the woods. At first, whenever I saw him, I would run back into the house. I never said a word about it. It got so I would see him every time I went into the backyard. He was always standing in the same spot at the edge of the woods, always smiling, always beckoning for me. And whenever my grandmother or my grandfather came outside, he would suddenly just not be there. One day I saw him, and he talked to me, and he said, "Come play with me." I stood there looking at him as he kept motioning me to come closer. I was so scared, but I was also tired of being scared. Maybe, if I did what he wanted, he would go away and I wouldn't see him anymore. Besides, the house was right there and I knew I could run away fast if I had to. So I walked over to him, to the edge of the woods. He stayed completely still, smiling. And I said, "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers." I really said that. And he said, "But I'm not a stranger. I've been here a long, long time. Come play with me." He turned and started walking into the woods, and I followed him. Almost as soon as I stepped into the forest, it was like clouds blocking the sun. It became very, very dark. He led me to a tree about 50 feet into the woods. It was enormous, with big twisted branches that hung down low and roots like claws digging into the earth. He stopped and turned around to face me, and it seemed like his smile was even bigger, almost the whole of his face. And he said, "This is where I brought all the kids to play. Now they live down here." He pointed down at the earth, the spots in between the roots of the big tree. "That's a secret. No one else knows." Then he put a finger in front of his mouth. Even after I put them down there, I could still play with them for a long, long time. Then he looked up at the big branches above us. "I'm up there now. You can see me if you look." And then he wasn't there. I was all alone in the woods by that tree. But I felt something up above me, something on the tree branch right above my head. I didn't want to look and see whatever it was. And I heard his voice coming from not far above my head. "Come play with me." Then I felt hands suddenly touch my shoulders, and I screamed. The hands spun me around, and it was my grandfather, asking me what the hell I was doing in the woods. He dragged me back into the house, and he and my grandmother sat me down. I told them everything that happened, everything I'd seen. They were very quiet. And then my grandmother started talking. "Mr. Gordon lived in the house next door. He was a little person. He worked in the funeral parlor. They caught him doing things to some of the kids. He killed himself. He hanged himself by one of the big trees in the woods. But you can't have seen him. He died back in 1964. My grandparents eventually sold the house and moved. The people who bought the house turned it into some kind of office, but the woods are still there. And I wonder if anyone still sees him, especially the children. I bet they do. Just like I think, there are some graves of children in the neighborhood cemetery that are actually empty, that their bodies are really buried between the roots of that tree in the old, dark woods. I know that because Mr. Gordon told me so. Shh. My name is Josh Hitchins, and I wrote about this and my other personal paranormal experiences in a one-man play I've performed called Ghost Stories. If you want to learn more about me, my website is joshhitchins.weebly.com. I also write and narrate a podcast of my own called Going Dark Theater, which tells in-depth tales of haunted places, unsolved mysteries, and horrific history. You can listen to the Going Dark Theater podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and it is hosted at goingdarktheater.podbean.com. Thank you to the hosts of the State of Fear podcast for allowing me to share my story. Pleasant dreams.